So, I'm wondering who might be familiar with this book. Anne Lamott is a favorite mentor of many writers and teachers of writing, particularly in my generation. And if you haven't read Bird by Bird yet, I highly recommend it. Sometimes I'm asked where I got the inspiration to begin integrating making and writing. And in previous sessions and in all of my books, I try to share as much as possible the names and the work of the people who inspire me. And it's easy to do that when it comes down to integrating makerspace centric sort of activities. But when I begin to think about how I began conceptualizing writing as an activity that's similar to making, it was definitely Anne Lamott who inspired that thinking. And so I want to read a passage from the chapter Short Assignments inside of Bird by Bird. And then from there, we're going to talk a little bit more about writing bit by bit and building and making each bit of our stories. And then more importantly, behaving in ways and provoking kids in ways and nudging them in ways that helps them make the transition from building to writing fairly painlessly and often in ways that excites them. So here we are with short assignments. The first useful concept is the idea of short assignments. Often when you sit down to write, what you have in mind is an autobiographical novel of your childhood, or a play about the immigrant experience, or the history of, say women. But this is like trying to scale a glacier. It's hard to get your footing and your fingertips get all red and frozen and torn up. Then your mental illnesses arrive at the desk like your sickest, most secretive relatives. And they pull up chairs in a semicircle around the computer, and they try to be quiet, but you know they are there with their weird, coppery breath, leering at you behind your back. What I do at this point, as the panic mounts and the jungle drums begin beating and I realize that the well has run dry and that my future is behind me and I'm going to have to get a job, only I'm completely unemployable, is to stop. First I try to breathe, because I'm either sitting there panting like a lapdog or I'm unintentionally making slow asthmatic death rattles, so I just sit there for a minute, breathing slowly, quietly. I let my mind wander. After a moment, I may notice that I'm trying to decide whether or not I'm too old for orthodontia and whether right now would be a good time to make a few calls. And then I start to think about learning to use makeup and how maybe I could find some boyfriend who is not a total and complete fixer-upper, and then my life would be totally great and I'd be happy all the time. And then I think about all the people I should have called back before I sat down to work, and how I should probably at least check in with my agent and tell him this great idea I have and see if he thinks it's a good idea and see if he thinks I need orthodontia, if that is what he's actually thinking whenever we have lunch together. Then I think about someone I'm really annoyed with or some financial problem that's driving me crazy and decide that I must resolve this before I get to today's work. So I become a dog with a chew toy, worrying it for a while, wrestling it to the ground, flinging it over my shoulder, chasing it, licking it, chewing it, flinging it back over my shoulder. I stop just short of actually barking. But all of this only takes somewhere between 1 and 2 minutes. So I haven't actually wasted all that much time. Still, it leaves me winded. I go back to trying to breathe slowly and calmly, and I finally notice the 1-inch picture frame that I put on my desk to remind me of short assignments. It reminds me that all I have to do is write down as much as I can see through a 1-inch picture frame. This is all I have to bite off for the time being. All I'm going to do right now, for example, is write that one paragraph that sets the story in my hometown in the late 50s when the trains were still running. I'm going to paint a picture of it in words on my word processor. Or all I'm going to do is describe the main character the very first time we meet her, when she first walks out the door and onto the porch. I am not even going to describe the expression on her face when she first notices the blind dog sitting behind the wheel of her car. Just what I can see through the 1-inch picture frame. Just one paragraph describing this woman in the town where I grew up the first time we encounter her. Every time I remember Anne Lamott's words, I'm inspired all over again to ensure that I always teach writing one small bit at a time. And these are the perfect 1-inch, 2-inch picture frames. So what does that look like? How do we help kids do that? How do we help them transition from having built their main character, for instance, to writing about their main character? I often say that the experience for me feels a bit like a dance. And I have to make sure that I'm stepping pretty quickly, that there's a sense of excitement and urgency in my voice as I lean over a child's desk, look at what they've built, and say to them, "Oh my goodness, I am so intrigued by your main character. I'm noticing that this character, his head seems a little bit bigger than the rest of his body. Like you intended that. Did you intend that? Yes, of course you intended that." And there's other really unique characteristics about this figure as well. Like I'm noticing that this character has just one arm and 3 legs, or whatever the distinguishing features are. I might take a moment to say, "I'm wondering if you could tell me more about this aspect of your character. Could you add that to your build?" And I'll walk away. That's it. Less than a minute if I can make it that fast, and enough urgency and sort of speed and excitement in the tone of my voice to inspire them to keep adding a little bit more detail to their build. And then I'll circle back around after I've hit up a few other writers and I'll say, "Here, I want to be able to remember, and I want you to be able to remember all of these distinguishing characteristics that you've put into your build around your main character. We're not going to be able to hold on to the build forever, so could you make me a list right on this Post-it note?" And I'll slap it right down next to the build, and I'll ask them to leave me 5 words, a list of labels, essentially, that align to that particular build. And I'll walk away again. Again, the tone of my voice needs to be really chipper. Not falsely so, but there needs to be an energy and enthusiasm behind it, a confidence that they're going to be able to produce what I want them to produce, and my assignment needs to fit within this very small picture frame. I'll circle around again once the list is made, and I'll hand them another note, and I'll say, "Could you take some of those words and start to make a phrase for me or a sentence?" Now, I want to stop here for just a minute and reflect a little bit with you about your most resistant writers, the kids who will not put down print at all. I find it very helpful to use a strategy called interactive writing with those particular writers. And in interactive writing, we kind of share the pen. So oftentimes, if I know that asking a particular writer, and they're usually outliers, to put down print, if I know that that's going to disrupt their flow and lead to some sort of tension that's going to be not productive or unproductive, I'll take a pen or pencil and I'll say, "These are the things I'm seeing in your build. What are you seeing?" "Oh," and I'll add that person, the writer's ideas, to this list. I might also make a deal with them. "I'm going to write down 3 things that I see inside of your build. Can you add 3 of your own?" "I'm going to add 2. Can you add 3? I'm going to add 1. Can you add 4? That scaffolding, that negotiating of how much print I'm putting down and how much print the writer is putting down. I'm intentional about how I'm scaffolding it as well. That dance back and forth often bridges your most resistant writers to print very quickly. The notion of making sure that we keep it small, writing inside a very small picture frame. The notion of giving them very quick provocations over their shoulder, nudges. "This is what I want you to do. Can you capture this really fast for me? I want you to capture it because this is so fabulous and I don't want to forget it. Could you turn those simple words into phrases for me?" "Oh, no. I'll write a phrase. Now you write a phrase. I'll write a phrase. You write a phrase. I'll write 2. You write 1. I'll write 1. You write 2. I'll write 2. You write 3. It typically is enough to begin getting kids to engage with us as writers, to share the pen with us. And then eventually labels become phrases, phrases become paragraphs, paragraphs become passages, and all the way through, I can be modeling how I might bridge between making and my own writing using my mini lessons. This week, your challenge is to either plan or actually attempt and execute a lesson where you invite kids to make and then write inside of a very small picture frame. If you're interested in sharing Anne Lamott's work with your writers as a bit of inspiration, the book again is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. I know many of you are very familiar with this book. It's the beginning of the short assignments chapter. I've also left a tool inside this session for you. This particular tool is downloadable. You can print it. The 5 different types of questions that I typically ask writers when I'm walking around the room are summarized in that tool. I've given you the most basic of them. And the 5 different purposes for asking kids those particular questions in ways that bridge them to writing are there as well. I'm eager to know what questions you might add to that list. So if you're interested in talking more about how you plan to begin executing this work and meeting this week's challenge, reach out to me on Twitter or in the Building Better Writers Facebook group. If you want to talk more about questions that you might add to that tool and provocations that might inspire the kids that you're working with to begin bridging their making to writing, let's talk a little bit more about that. I hope to hear from you. Good luck with this week's challenge, and I will see all of you next week.